At one point, the United States and the Soviet Union competed over who had more powerful and numerous nuclear weapons. For decades, the world prepared for nuclear war. Thankfully, such a war has never taken place. However, nuclear weapons were used twice in combat against living people. Though it happened long ago, these events should never be forgotten. Here are 10 remarkable facts about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was the summer of 1945, nearing the end of World War II. Germany and Italy had already surrendered, and it was clear the Allies had won. However, the Japanese Empire continued to resist, especially in the Pacific, where it was still fighting against the United States and its allies. Japan was suffering massive losses but showed no signs of surrendering. American forces were bombing Japanese cities heavily, using various types of bombs, including incendiaries. Several cities had been completely destroyed, and Tokyo was approximately half in ruins. The U.S. was preparing for a full-scale land invasion of the Japanese home islands, involving troops landing on beaches and advancing into urban areas. Military estimates suggested that such an operation could cost the United States up to 500,000 soldiers, more than all American losses in the entire war up to that point. Meanwhile, the Manhattan Project had successfully developed the world's first atomic bomb. The initial test took place in the American desert on July 16, 1945. Two more bombs were ready: Little Boy and Fat Man. U.S. President Harry Truman decided to use these weapons against Japan, hoping to demonstrate America's military power and force Japan to surrender. The decision sparked intense debate within U.S. leadership, with many voices both for and against. The bombs were transported to a military base on the island of Tinian in the Pacific. The plane that carried the bomb to Hiroshima was named Enola Gay, after the mother of the pilot, Paul Tibbets. At the time, the word gay simply meant cheerful in English. On August 6th, Enola Gay, carrying the atomic bomb, flew toward Japan. It was accompanied by two other aircraft. One, Necessary Evil, was assigned to photograph the explosion, and the other, the Great Artiste, carried scientific instruments to measure radiation and blast effects. Enola Gay released the bomb over the center of Hiroshima in the morning. 45 seconds after the drop, the bomb detonated about 600 meters above the ground. The explosion instantly killed around 80,000 people, many of whom were vaporized near the epicenter. This made accurate counts difficult due to the absence of bodies. Now let's turn to the bombing of Nagasaki and its aftermath. Following the Hiroshima bombing, President Truman issued an ultimatum demanding Japan's unconditional surrender. Japan did not respond. As a result, a second bomb was dropped 3 days later, on August 9th. Initially, the intended target was the city of Kokura, but due to heavy cloud cover, the crew changed course to Nagasaki. This led to the Japanese phrase, "Kokura's luck," meaning a fortunate escape from disaster. The bomb dropped on Nagasaki, Fat Man, was a plutonium device, more complex and powerful than the uranium-based Little Boy. It used an implosion method for detonation and had an explosive yield of about 21 kilotons, compared to Little Boy's 15. The B-29 bomber Boxcar, under the command of Major Charles Sweeney, carried out the mission. Several other support planes participated, including the Great Artiste and Big Stink. Enola Gay also joined to observe the mission. At 11:02 a.m., Fat Man detonated about 500 meters above Nagasaki, creating a massive fireball and shockwave that destroyed most buildings within several kilometers. The atomic bombings, combined with the Soviet Union's entry into the war against Japan, ultimately led the Japanese government to surrender. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945, citing the devastating power of the new weapon as a key reason. The destruction and human cost were enormous. The blast created shadows where intense heat left outlines of people and objects on walls and ground. Temperatures at the epicenters reached millions of degrees Celsius, instantly vaporizing anything nearby. Survivors suffered severe burns, and fires spread rapidly through cities made mostly of wood, destroying far more buildings than the initial blasts. In Hiroshima, for instance, the Motoyasu River experienced instant evaporation of its water, leaving only a scorched riverbed. Many people who tried to seek refuge in rivers and lakes died as the water around them vanished in an instant. Following the explosions, radioactive fallout descended as black rain, worsening the effects of radiation exposure and damaging the environment. Water sources were contaminated, firefighting efforts became impossible, and aquatic life was wiped out. One horrifying fact is that compared to modern warheads, the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were relatively weak. Today's nuclear arsenals include warheads hundreds of times more powerful. For example, Russia's R-36M missile system carries a warhead reportedly 1,000 times more powerful than Little Boy. Despite the devastation, many residents of Hiroshima and Nagasaki survived. Those who were far enough from the epicenter or sheltered in strong buildings made it through. Even today, over 100,000 survivors, or hibakusha, still live in Japan. Their children, too, may carry the genetic legacy of radiation exposure. Surprisingly, these survivors have often faced discrimination rather than respect. Japanese society once believed they carried bad luck or harmful energy, leading others to avoid them. Employers hesitated to hire them, fearing health issues would raise insurance costs. Some people even wrongly believed they emitted radiation. Radiation exposure led to long-term health problems. Many survivors developed cancer, especially leukemia, as well as thyroid, breast, lung, and skin cancers. Others suffered chronic pain, infections, or were left disabled. Some were disfigured and socially isolated. Studies showed their children were at higher risk of genetic disorders. Psychological trauma was also immense. Survivors endured the loss of loved ones, destruction of homes, and forced relocations. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Medical supplies depleted, and many doctors and nurses were among the injured. Over time, international aid helped improve care for the affected. While the suffering was tragic, it's important to acknowledge that Japan had allied with Nazi Germany and attacked the U.S. first. Atrocities committed by Japanese forces across Asia contributed to the U.S. decision to use nuclear weapons to hasten the end of the war. Among the most remarkable stories is that of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the only officially recognized person to survive both bombings. He was in Hiroshima on business when the first bomb fell, suffering severe burns and temporary blindness. The next day, he returned to Nagasaki. While describing the explosion to his boss, the second bomb detonated. This time, he was in a solid building and escaped injury. Despite serious infection from his initial wounds, he survived and was later officially acknowledged as a hibakusha of both events. He died in 2009 at the age of 93. Before the atomic bombings, the U.S. had already conducted devastating incendiary raids on Japanese cities. These raids killed tens of thousands, sometimes more than the atomic bombs themselves, as fires swept through densely built urban areas. Interestingly, the U.S. often dropped leaflets the day before bombing raids, warning civilians to evacuate. These leaflets were written by captured Japanese soldiers to make them more convincing. However, no warning leaflets were dropped before Hiroshima. Officials feared the bomb might fail, making any warning counterproductive. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain the only instances of nuclear weapons being used in war. Debates continue to this day about whether their use was justified. Supporters argue that the bombings forced Japan to surrender, thus saving millions of lives that would have been lost in a prolonged war. Others claim Japan was already on the verge of surrender due to naval blockades and conventional bombing campaigns. Critics also raise moral and legal concerns, pointing to the mass killing of civilians as a violation of international laws and basic human rights. Some suggest that the real reason Japan surrendered was the Soviet Union's sudden declaration of war, not the atomic bombings. Others believe one bomb would have been enough to demonstrate America's power and that the second strike on Nagasaki was excessive. The bombings left deep psychological scars on the crews involved. Paul Tibbets, pilot of Enola Gay, defended the mission until his death, believing it saved lives. Charles Sweeney of Boxcar felt similarly, though he acknowledged the horror of the aftermath. Robert Lewis, Enola Gay's co-pilot, wrote in his mission log, "My God, what have we done?" His words came to symbolize the moral struggle faced by the crews. Physicist Robert Oppenheimer, head of the Manhattan Project, later became a vocal advocate for arms control and opposed further development of nuclear weapons. One of the most surprising facts is that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were rebuilt and repopulated quickly. Unlike Chernobyl, these cities did not become uninhabitable. There are several reasons for this. First, the bombs exploded in the air, not on the ground, which greatly reduced radioactive fallout. Second, the isotopes produced had relatively short half-lives, meaning radiation levels dropped to safer thresholds within a few years. Third, efforts were made to remove contaminated soil and demolish irradiated buildings. Most importantly, nuclear bombs are not designed to spread radiation widely. Their primary function is to destroy via explosive force, unlike nuclear reactor accidents like Chernobyl, which release massive amounts of radiation. In the years after the war, Japan and the U.S. developed strong diplomatic and economic ties. Japan is now under the American nuclear umbrella, meaning the US would use nuclear weapons to defend Japan if necessary. Today, few Japanese harbor resentment toward Americans over the bombings, viewing the war as a tragedy initiated by their own government. Even the deepest conflicts can eventually be resolved. Peace, understanding, and rebuilding are possible even after the darkest moments in human history. Thanks for watching this video until the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hope to see you again soon.